The wind howled through the darkened sky as the millionaire's scream echoed into the void, his hands clawing desperately at the empty air. For a fleeting moment, he seemed suspended in time, a shadow against the city lights shimmering on the river below. Then, he plunged headlong into the cold, unrelenting waters, disappearing beneath the surface with a deafening splash. On the bridge above, a woman stood frozen, her chest heaving as her trembling hands gripped the railing. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock, yet there was no one around to see the panic that flickered in her gaze, or so she thought. In the shadows, tucked behind the thick iron beams of the bridge, a little girl crouched, her small hands clamped over her mouth to stifle a gasp. She had seen everything. Every scream, every push, every fall. She remained silent, trembling, but her wide eyes burned with the memory of the moment. Now back to where it all began. 2 weeks earlier, the sun bathed the city in warm, golden light as Daniel Grant, a self-made millionaire, leaned back in his sleek leather chair, sipping his espresso. His office overlooked the bustling streets below, where his latest startup's logo gleamed on billboards. Life was perfect, or so it seemed. Daniel's success story was the kind of tale that people dreamed about. From a scrappy kid who grew up with nothing to a tech entrepreneur who had built an empire from scratch, he'd earned his fortune with relentless ambition and charm. But with success came the complications. Deals to close, competitors to outsmart, and, of course, people from his past who resurfaced at the worst possible times. That morning, as he closed another lucrative contract, a name flashed on his phone screen: Vanessa. He froze, the air thick with an old, unresolved tension. Vanessa Lorne wasn't just any ex-girlfriend. She was the ex, the one who'd left a mark so deep it never quite healed. The breakup had been fiery, leaving behind a trail of accusations, heartbreak, and anger. And now, out of nowhere, she was calling. Against his better judgment, Daniel answered. "Vanessa." "Daniel," her voice was smooth, too smooth. "We need to talk." Daniel met Vanessa at a quiet cafe downtown. She arrived looking as stunning as ever, her sharp features framed by jet-black hair and her lips painted in a deep, commanding red. Despite himself, Daniel's chest tightened. "I'm not here to waste your time," she began, sitting across from him. "I need your help." Daniel raised an eyebrow, suspicion prickling at the back of his mind. Vanessa was many things: beautiful, confident, and intelligent, but humble was never one of them. The last thing he expected her to do was ask for his help. Help? With what? She hesitated, her polished demeanor faltering. "I've gotten myself into some trouble," she admitted, lowering her voice. "And you're the only one who can get me out." Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. "Trouble, huh? What kind of trouble?" Her eyes darted around the room before she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe some people money. Dangerous people." That was how Daniel found himself caught in the tangled web of Vanessa's life once again. Despite his better judgment, he agreed to help her, not with money, but with advice on how to manage her situation. After all, he reasoned, he had the resources and connections to guide her. But Vanessa had other plans. Over the next few days, Vanessa inserted herself into Daniel's life with alarming ease. First, it was the late-night calls, then the accidental visits to his office. Despite himself, Daniel felt old feelings stirring, feelings he thought he'd buried years ago. Vanessa had a way of drawing people in, of making them feel like they were the only ones who mattered. But as the days turned into weeks, cracks began to form. Vanessa's stories didn't always add up. The dangerous people she claimed to owe money to seemed to exist more in shadows than in reality. And then there was the way she talked about Daniel's success, her words laced with both admiration and a hint of bitterness. The tension between them reached its peak one stormy evening. They were on the bridge, arguing over something trivial, an old wound reopened by an offhand comment. Vanessa's voice rose above the wind, her words sharp and cutting. "You think you're better than everyone else because you made it big, don't you?" she spat. "You've always looked down on me." "That's not true," Daniel shot back. "I wanted to help you, Vanessa. But you never wanted help. You wanted control." Her eyes narrowed, her breath coming fast. "You don't get to talk to me like that, Daniel. Not after everything we've been through." Before Daniel could respond, she lunged. It wasn't a push, not exactly. More like an impulsive, desperate shove. But it was enough. Daniel stumbled backward, his foot catching on the edge of the bridge. He teetered for a moment, his arms flailing, and then he fell. The little girl on the bridge bit her lip so hard it bled, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold. Vanessa didn't look down at the water where Daniel had disappeared. Instead, she turned and walked away, her face pale and her hands shaking. The girl knew she should run, knew she should find someone, anyone, to tell. But something held her back. She remained in her hiding spot, her mind racing. What would she do now? The night felt colder as the little girl sat in her hiding spot, shivering from both fear and the biting wind. Her name was Mia, and at 8 years old, she didn't fully understand everything she'd just seen, but she knew enough. Someone had been hurt, maybe even killed. The image of the man falling from the bridge replayed in her mind, each time making her stomach twist tighter. Mia wanted to scream for help, but the words wouldn't come. Her instincts told her that staying quiet was safer, at least for now. She peeked out from behind the iron beams just in time to see the woman, Vanessa, disappear into the darkness. Mia remained frozen for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. When she finally stood, her knees wobbled so badly she almost fell. She needed to tell someone what happened, but who would believe her? Adults rarely listened to kids, especially when it came to something as serious as this. And what if the woman found out Mia had seen her? The thought made her heart race. Meanwhile, Vanessa was pacing her apartment, her hands clenched into fists. She couldn't stop replaying the moment Daniel had fallen. It had been an accident, she told herself. He'd lost his balance. She hadn't meant for him to fall, had she? Her reflection in the mirror across the room caught her attention. Her normally sharp and confident demeanor was gone. Instead, she looked like a ghost, her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled. She turned away, unable to face herself. She had to think, and fast. She knew the river was deep and the current strong. There was a chance no one would find Daniel's body, or so she hoped. But what if someone had seen her? Her mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. She couldn't let this ruin her. Not after everything she'd been through. The next morning, the city buzzed with life as always. People rushed to work, cars honked in endless traffic, and vendors shouted their prices in the crowded markets. It was as if nothing had happened the night before. But for two people, the world felt drastically different. Vanessa kept her head low as she walked through the streets, her sunglasses shielding her eyes from curious strangers. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Every sound, every movement made her jump. She tried to convince herself it was just paranoia, but the unease lingered. Mia, on the other hand, was sitting in her classroom, barely paying attention to her teacher's lesson on fractions. Her mind was elsewhere, filled with questions and fears. She'd told no one about what she'd seen. Not her parents, not her friends, no one. But the weight of the secret was almost unbearable. When the lunch bell rang, Mia stayed behind, fidgeting in her seat. Her teacher, Mrs. Olson, noticed. "Mia, is everything okay?" she asked gently. Mia hesitated, chewing on her lip. She wanted to tell Mrs. Olson, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she shook her head. "I'm fine," she mumbled before grabbing her lunchbox and hurrying outside. By the third day after the incident, Vanessa was starting to feel more in control. There had been no news of a body found in the river, no police at her door. Maybe she'd gotten lucky. Maybe this would all blow over. She decided to test the waters, so to speak. That afternoon, she went to a small cafe near the river, a place Daniel had often frequented. She ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the water flow beneath the bridge in the distance. Her fingers drummed nervously on the table as she sipped her drink. "Vanessa." The voice made her freeze. She looked up to see one of Daniel's friends, Elliot, standing in front of her, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Elliot," she said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise." Elliot frowned. "Have you seen Daniel? He's been missing for a few days. We were supposed to meet up, but he never showed." "That's not like him." Vanessa's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "No, I haven't seen him," she lied. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know," Elliot admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I called the police, but they said it's too soon to file a missing person report." It's not like Daniel to just disappear. If you hear from him, will you let me know? Of course, Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. She watched as Elliot left the cafe, her mind spinning with new fears. If people were already looking for Daniel, it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. She needed a plan. That evening, as Vanessa sat in her apartment, staring at her phone, Mia was back on the bridge. She'd ridden her bike there after school, drawn by some invisible force she couldn't explain. She stood at the spot where the man had fallen, her small hands clutching the railing as she peered into the dark water below. "What are you doing here?" The voice startled her, and she spun around to see a man in a police uniform standing behind her. His face was kind but serious. I just, Mia stammered, her cheeks flushing. "I was curious." The officer crouched down to her level, his eyes searching hers. Curious about what? Mia hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything, but fear held her back. "Nothing," she said finally. "I just like the view." The officer studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right. But it's not safe to be here alone. You should head home." Mia nodded and hopped on her bike, pedaling away as fast as she could. But as she rode through the dimly lit streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. Back at her apartment, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number, but the words sent a chill down her spine. "I saw what you did." Her hands trembled as she read the message again, her mind racing. Was it a prank? Or had someone really seen her that night? As Vanessa stared at the screen, the phone buzzed again, this time with a photo. It was blurry but unmistakable, her silhouette on the bridge, her hands outstretched toward Daniel. Her blood ran cold. Someone had seen her, and now they were watching. Vanessa's phone slipped from her trembling hands and clattered onto the floor. She scrambled to pick it up, her heart racing as she reread the messages. Each word felt like a noose tightening around her neck. "I saw what you did." The photo was worse. The grainy image was dark and unclear, but it was enough. Her silhouette, her hands outstretched, it captured the moment Daniel had fallen. There was no denying it. Someone had been there. But who? And why had they waited 3 days to contact her? She typed a reply with shaking fingers. "Who is this? What do you want?" The minutes that followed felt like hours. She sat frozen, staring at her phone as she waited for a response. When it finally came, her blood ran cold. "You'll find out soon enough." Mia pedaled her bike faster, her eyes darting nervously over her shoulder. The feeling of being followed hadn't left her since she'd spoken to the police officer. She couldn't see anyone behind her, but the sensation was so strong it made her skin crawl. She finally reached her neighborhood, where the familiar sight of cozy houses and glowing porch lights brought a small sense of relief. She dropped her bike in the driveway and hurried inside, locking the door behind her. "Mia," her mom called from the kitchen. "You're late. Dinner's ready." "Sorry," Mia mumbled, kicking off her shoes. She wasn't hungry. Her mind was still stuck on the bridge and the man who'd fallen. And now there was the police officer, too. What if he came back? What if the woman, Vanessa, found out Mia had seen her? She went to her room and shut the door, trying to calm her racing thoughts. But sleep wouldn't come that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel falling and Vanessa's silhouette on the bridge. The next morning, Vanessa was no closer to figuring out who had sent the messages. She spent the night going over every detail in her mind, but nothing made sense. The messages were anonymous. There was no way to trace them. All she could do was wait, and the waiting was unbearable. Her phone buzzed again, making her jump. She snatched it off the table, her heart pounding as she opened the message. "Meet me at the bridge tonight. Midnight. Come alone." Vanessa's first instinct was to ignore it. Meeting this person, whoever they were, was dangerous. But what choice did she have? If they went to the police with the photo, her life would be over. She couldn't risk that. Mia sat in class the next day, unable to focus. Her teacher's voice faded into the background as her thoughts drifted to the bridge. The man had fallen, but she hadn't seen what happened after that. Did he survive? Was he still in the water? Or had the current carried him away? She decided she couldn't keep this secret any longer. During recess, She went to the principal's office and asked to speak to someone. A few minutes later, she found herself sitting across from a police officer, the same one she'd seen on the bridge the night before. "Hello again," the officer said, smiling kindly. "What's on your mind?" Mia hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She took a deep breath and finally spoke. "I saw something on the bridge a few nights ago." The officer's expression shifted, his smile fading. "What did you see?" "There was a man," Mia said, her voice trembling. "He fell into the river. And there was a woman. I think she pushed him." The officer leaned forward, his expression serious. "Can you describe her?" Mia nodded slowly. "She had dark hair. She was tall. I don't know her name, but I think she knew the man." The officer scribbled notes in his notebook, his brow furrowed. "You did the right thing by telling me this," he said. "We're going to look into it. If we need more information, can we call you?" Mia nodded, relief washing over her. But as she left the office, a new fear crept in. If the woman found out Mia had spoken to the police, what would she do? Vanessa arrived at the bridge just before midnight. The city was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the gentle lapping of water below. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, her breath visible in the cold night air. She waited, her nerves fraying with each passing second. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of the wind sounded like footsteps. Finally, a figure emerged from the darkness. "Who are you?" Vanessa demanded, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" The figure stepped closer, and Vanessa's heart sank. It was Elliot. "I knew it," he said, his voice low and full of anger. "I knew you had something to do with Daniel's disappearance." Vanessa took a step back, panic setting in. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. "I didn't." "Save it," Elliot snapped. "I saw the messages on his phone, Vanessa. I know he met you that night. And now he's gone." Vanessa's mind raced. If Elliot knew, then he might have the photo. Or worse, he might already have gone to the police. "You don't understand," she said, her voice pleading. "It was an accident. I didn't mean for him to fall." Elliot's expression hardened. "The police are already looking into it. It's only a matter of time before they find out the truth." Before Vanessa could respond, Elliot pulled out his phone and held it up, recording her. "Why don't you tell the camera what happened, Vanessa? Tell everyone how you killed Daniel." Vanessa's blood boiled. Without thinking, she lunged forward, grabbing for the phone. Elliot stumbled backward, the device slipping from his hand and clattering onto the pavement. They struggled, their movements frantic and clumsy, until Vanessa finally pushed Elliot away. He lost his balance and fell, his body slamming against the edge of the railing. For a moment, he teetered there, his arms flailing. "Elliot, no!" Vanessa shouted, reaching for him. But it was too late. With a terrifying scream, Elliot tipped over the edge and disappeared into the dark water below. The scream echoed into the still night, fading into the sound of rushing water below. Vanessa stood frozen, her hands gripping the cold metal of the bridge's railing as she stared into the darkness where Elliot had disappeared. Her chest heaved as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She hadn't meant for this to happen. Not again. The sound of the water rippling below sent a shiver up her spine. She leaned over the edge, straining her eyes to see any sign of Elliot. A splash, a movement, anything that meant he might still be alive. But the river was calm, its surface unbroken. Vanessa stepped back, her mind racing. She couldn't stay there. Someone might have heard the commotion or seen them on the bridge. If anyone found her there now, she'd have no way to explain what had happened. Her legs felt like jelly as she turned and hurried away, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. As she walked briskly down the empty street, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind carried whispers. Her paranoia was growing, feeding off the guilt and fear that gnawed at her. But she wasn't just imagining things this time. In the distance, a pair of small eyes watched her retreating figure. Mia had been there, hidden in the bushes near the bridge. She'd seen everything. The next morning, Vanessa sat in her apartment, staring at the phone on her kitchen counter. The events of the night before replayed in her mind like a nightmare on repeat. Elliot's voice, full of anger. the look on his face as he lost his balance, the way he disappeared into the water. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone. She needed to do something, anything, to regain control of the situation. But what could she do? She couldn't go to the police. They'd never believe her. And whoever had sent her the text messages clearly knew too much. She was trapped. As she stared at the screen, it lit up with a new message. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened it. 2 down. How many more will it take? Her stomach churned. Whoever this person was, they weren't just a passive observer. They were playing a game, a twisted, dangerous game, and Vanessa was the pawn. Mia sat on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. She hadn't told anyone about what she'd seen the night before. Not her mom, not the police, no one. But the weight of her secret was becoming too much to bear. She thought about the woman, Vanessa, and the look of panic on her face as she'd pushed the man over the edge. Mia didn't understand everything, but she knew one thing for sure: Vanessa was dangerous. Mia's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. Her mom poked her head in, smiling gently. "Hey, sweetie. Everything okay?" Mia hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine." Her mom stepped into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "You've been really quiet lately. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." Mia wanted to tell her. She wanted to spill everything, to let someone else carry the burden of what she'd seen. But every time she opened her mouth, the words got stuck. She was afraid. What if Vanessa found out? What if Mia ended up in the river, too? "I'm okay," Mia said softly. "Just tired." Her mom kissed her forehead and left the room, but Mia didn't feel any better. If anything, the guilt weighed heavier on her chest. Vanessa wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. That afternoon, the police launched an official investigation into Daniel Grant's disappearance. Detectives interviewed his friends, colleagues, and even his employees, trying to piece together his final movements. It didn't take long for Vanessa's name to come up. "She called him," one of Daniel's employees told the detectives. "A couple of times, actually. And I think they met up a few days before he went missing." "Did he say what they talked about?" the detective asked. "No, but he didn't seem happy about it. He said something about her being in trouble." The detective made a note and moved on to the next question, but Vanessa's name remained at the top of his list. By the time evening fell, Vanessa was unraveling. She hadn't left her apartment all day, too afraid of running into anyone who might recognize her. She jumped at every noise, every creak of the floorboards or distant shout from the street below. As the hours dragged on, she found herself pacing the small living room, her mind spiraling with worst-case scenarios. The police were going to come for her. It was only a matter of time. And when they did, she had no defense. No alibi. No way to explain what had happened. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Vanessa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She crept to the peephole and peered through, her breath hitching when she saw who it was. A man in a suit stood on the other side, his face calm but unreadable. He wasn't a police officer, at least, not in uniform, but something about him screamed authority. Vanessa hesitated, debating whether to open the door. But before she could make a decision, he knocked again, louder this time. "Vanessa Lorne," he called out, his voice firm. "We need to talk." Vanessa's pulse pounded in her ears as the man's voice echoed through the door. She pressed her back against the wall, her mind racing. Who was he? What did he want? He didn't look like a detective, but the determined knock and calm authority in his voice made her stomach churn. "Vanessa, I know you're in there," the man said again, his tone more insistent this time. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." She hesitated for a moment longer, then forced herself to take a deep breath. If he knew her name and had come all the way to her apartment, hiding wasn't going to help. She needed answers as much as he did. Vanessa unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see the man's face. He was tall and clean-cut, with sharp features and a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound firm. The man held up a badge, flashing it quickly before tucking it back into his coat. "Detective James Carter," he said. "I have some questions about Daniel Grant." Vanessa's stomach dropped. She tightened her grip on the door, her knuckles turning white. I don't know anything about Daniel, she said, her voice wavering. Detective Carter tilted his head slightly, studying her. That's interesting, because his phone records show multiple calls from you in the days before he went missing. And a witness mentioned seeing you together. Vanessa's mind scrambled for a response. We talked, but I don't know what happened to him. I swear. Carter didn't blink. Mind if I come in? This is easier to discuss in private. Every instinct told her to refuse, but she knew that would only make her look more suspicious. She stepped aside, her heart pounding, and let him in. Mia sat at the kitchen table, stirring her cereal absently. Her mom was talking on the phone in the next room, her voice a faint murmur. Mia wasn't listening. Her thoughts were still consumed by what she'd seen on the bridge. She glanced at her school bag, where she'd hidden the notebook she'd been scribbling in since that night. Inside were sketches of the scene, rough drawings of the woman, the man falling, the river. She wasn't an artist, but she needed some way to get the images out of her head. Her mom's voice grew louder, pulling Mia out of her thoughts. Yes, I'll be there soon. Thanks for letting me know. Her mom hung up and entered the kitchen, grabbing her purse from the counter. Sweetie, I have to step out for a little while. Stay here, okay? Mia nodded, barely acknowledging her mom as she left. The moment the door closed, Mia jumped up from the table and grabbed her notebook. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling as she stopped on the latest drawing, a detailed sketch of Vanessa's silhouette. She had to do something. She couldn't keep this secret any longer. Back in Vanessa's apartment, Detective Carter was circling the room, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Vanessa sat on the couch, her hands gripping her knees tightly. She felt like a mouse being cornered by a cat. You seem nervous, Carter said, glancing at her. Wouldn't you be? Vanessa shot back. You show up at my door, accusing me of knowing something about a missing person. I didn't accuse you of anything, Carter said evenly. But I can't ignore the facts. You and Daniel had a history, didn't you? Vanessa stiffened. That was years ago. It has nothing to do with this. Maybe, Carter said. But I'm curious. Why did you call him? What did you two talk about? She hesitated, trying to think of an explanation that wouldn't incriminate her. I needed help, she admitted finally. Financial help. I was in a bad spot, and Daniel was someone I thought might be willing to help. And did he? Carter asked. Vanessa shook her head. No. He wasn't interested. That was the last time I saw him. Carter studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. For now. For now. Vanessa echoed, her voice rising slightly. I'll be honest with you, Vanessa, Carter said, his voice softening. We don't have enough to connect you to Daniel's disappearance. But if there's something you're not telling me, it's only a matter of time before we find out. Vanessa didn't respond. She watched as Carter pulled a card from his pocket and set it on the coffee table. If you think of anything else, call me. He left without another word, leaving Vanessa alone in the suffocating silence of her apartment. Mia stood at the edge of the bridge, clutching her notebook tightly. She had ridden her bike there after her mom left, unable to resist the pull of the place. The river below looked calm, almost peaceful, but she knew what lay beneath the surface. She flipped to the sketch of Vanessa and stared at it, her small fingers tracing the lines. She didn't know what she hoped to find by coming back here, but the weight in her chest felt a little lighter now that she was here. Mia. The voice made her jump. She spun around to see the same police officer from before standing a few feet away, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. What are you doing here again? He asked gently. Mia hesitated, clutching the notebook tighter. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. But as she looked into his kind eyes, she made a decision. I saw something, she said softly. And I think you need to see it too. She opened the notebook and handed it to him, her hands shaking. The officer's expression grew serious as he flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he stopped on the sketch of Vanessa. This is the woman you saw, he asked. Mia nodded, her eyes welling with tears. She pushed him. I saw her push him. The officer looked back at the sketch, his jaw tightening. You've done the right thing by telling me this, he said. We're going to figure out what happened. As Mia watched him walk away with her notebook, she felt a small flicker of hope. But it was quickly overshadowed by a new fear. If Vanessa found out what Mia had done, what would she do to her? Vanessa sat in the darkened living room of her apartment, the only light coming from the small lamp on the coffee table. Detective Carter's visit had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. He hadn't outright accused her, but his questions had felt like tiny daggers, cutting away at her defenses. She could still feel the weight of his gaze, as though he were piecing together the puzzle of her guilt. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She snatched it up, her heart pounding as she read the message. "You're running out of time." Her stomach twisted. The unknown sender hadn't contacted her since the night of the bridge, and she'd almost convinced herself they'd disappeared. But the game wasn't over. "Not yet." Vanessa typed a response with trembling fingers. "What do you want from me?" This time, the reply came almost instantly. "Meet me at the riverfront tonight. Midnight. No excuses." Vanessa's mind raced. Whoever this was, they were pushing her further into a corner. She didn't have many options left. If she didn't show up, they might go to the police with what they knew, or worse. She didn't have a choice. Mia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her notebook was gone, taken by the police officer, and she felt both relieved and terrified. She'd done the right thing, hadn't she? But what if Vanessa found out? What if she came looking for Mia? Her heart pounded as she remembered Vanessa's face on the bridge. How cold and distant it had been as she walked away from the man's fall. Vanessa wasn't the kind of person to just let things go. Mia glanced at her window, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. The darkness outside felt heavier than usual, as though something was lurking just beyond her line of sight. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. At midnight, Vanessa arrived at the riverfront, her coat pulled tightly around her. The area was quiet, the usual bustle of the city replaced by an eerie stillness. She scanned the shadows, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Vanessa." The voice came from behind her, low and calm. She spun around to see a figure step out of the shadows. It wasn't who she expected. It wasn't the man who'd sent her the messages or anyone she'd seen before. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with dark eyes and a hard expression. "Who are you?" Vanessa demanded, her voice trembling. The woman tilted her head. "Does it matter? I know what you did. That's all you need to know." Vanessa's throat tightened. "If you're trying to blackmail me, I don't have any money." The woman let out a cold laugh. "This isn't about money, Vanessa. It's about justice. You took someone's life. You don't get to walk away from that." "It was an accident," Vanessa snapped, her voice rising. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Accident or not, Daniel is gone. And now Elliot is, too." Vanessa froze. "How do you know about Elliot?" The woman's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "I know everything, Vanessa. And so will the police if you don't do exactly what I say." Vanessa's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "For now, just to know that you're scared," the woman said, her voice sharp. "You should be." Before Vanessa could respond, the woman turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Vanessa alone with her racing thoughts and the sound of the river lapping against the shore. The next morning, Detective Carter stood in his office, flipping through the pages of the notebook Mia had given to the police. The sketches were crude but detailed enough to paint a vivid picture of what the little girl had seen. Carter's gaze lingered on the drawing of the woman with dark hair. He called one of his colleagues into the office. "Run a check on Daniel Grant's known associates," he said. "Look for a woman matching this description. I want everything we've got." As the officer left to carry out the task, Carter leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the pieces of the puzzle. The witness, the little girl, was credible. Her story matched what little evidence they'd been able to gather so far. If they could find the woman in the drawing, they might finally have a lead. Mia was walking home from school when she noticed a car idling a few houses down from hers. It was an old beat-up sedan with tinted windows that made it impossible to see who was inside. She hesitated on the sidewalk, her backpack feeling heavier than usual. The car didn't move. Its engine hummed softly, but it stayed in place, as if waiting for her to make the next move. Mia's stomach churned with unease. She forced herself to keep walking, her steps quickening as she approached her house. She glanced over her shoulder once, But the car hadn't budged. When she reached her front door, she fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking. She pushed the door open and slammed it shut behind her, locking it quickly. Her heart was racing. Peeking through the curtains, she saw the car pull away slowly, disappearing down the street. She didn't know who it was or what they wanted, but she had a sinking feeling it was connected to what she'd seen on the bridge. Vanessa spent the day pacing her apartment, replaying the encounter at the riverfront in her mind. The woman's words haunted her. "You don't get to walk away from this." She didn't know who the woman was or how she knew so much, but one thing was clear: Vanessa wasn't in control anymore. Someone else was pulling the strings, and they were getting closer to unraveling everything. As the sun set, Vanessa's phone buzzed with another message. Her breath hitched as she opened it. "You're running out of excuses. Time to make a choice." Below the text was a photo of Mia, walking to school, her small frame dwarfed by her oversized backpack. Vanessa's heart stopped. Whoever this person was, they weren't just threatening her anymore. They were going after anyone connected to what had happened, including a little girl who didn't even know how much danger she was in. Vanessa's grip on the phone tightened as a new kind of fear took hold. This wasn't just about her anymore, and she didn't know how to stop what was coming. Vanessa stared at the photo of Mia on her phone, her heart racing. The innocent image of the little girl walking to school felt like a ticking time bomb. Whoever this shadowy tormentor was, they had taken things to a terrifying new level. This wasn't just about Daniel or Elliot anymore. It was about Mia, and Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that the girl's life was now in her hands. Her mind raced. How did they know about Mia? What did she have to do with any of this? Vanessa thought back to the night on the bridge, trying to recall every detail. She hadn't seen anyone else there, but clearly she'd been wrong. Someone had been watching, and now they had shifted their attention to an innocent child. Her phone buzzed again, and she flinched. The message was short and chilling. "If you don't want her to get hurt, you'll do exactly as I say." Vanessa's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She wanted to fight back, to tell whoever this was to leave her alone, but the threat against Mia made her pause. She couldn't afford to take chances. Not with a child's life on the line. "What do you want?" She typed back. The response came instantly. "Wait for my instructions." Vanessa stared at the screen, her stomach churning. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by an invisible hand. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ever since she'd seen the car outside her house, a knot of anxiety had taken up permanent residence in her chest. Her mom had noticed her nervous behavior but chalked it up to school stress, completely unaware of the storm brewing in her daughter's life. After school, Mia walked home with her head down, her heart pounding every time a car drove past. She didn't know what, or who, she was afraid of, but the unease was suffocating. When she reached her house, she was relieved to find it empty. Her mom wouldn't be home from work for another hour, giving Mia a brief moment of peace. She locked the door behind her and went to her room, her backpack slipping off her shoulders and landing with a thud on the floor. She sat on her bed, staring at the spot where her notebook had been. Without it, she felt exposed, like her only shield against the terrifying memories of that night was gone. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. Her heart jumped into her throat. No one was supposed to be home. She stayed still, barely breathing, as another knock sounded, louder this time. "Mia," a man's voice called. "It's Detective Carter. Can we talk?" Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. What was he doing here? And how did he know where she lived? Mia opened the door cautiously, peeking out to see Carter standing on the porch, his expression serious but kind. "Hi, Mia," he said. "I just wanted to check in with you. Is your mom home?" She shook her head. "She's still at work." "Okay. Is it all right if I come in for a minute?" Mia hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to let him in, but something about his calm demeanor made her feel a little safer. She stepped aside, and Carter entered the house, his sharp eyes taking in the surroundings. "I wanted to thank you for sharing your notebook with us," he said as he sat down at the kitchen table. "Your drawings were very helpful. They gave us a lead." Mia sat across from him, her hands fidgeting nervously. "Did you find her?" she asked softly. "We're working on it," Carter said. "But I need your help again." Can you tell me more about what you saw that night? Anything you remember, even if it seems small. Mia nodded slowly, her mind racing as she tried to piece together the fragments of that night. The woman, she had dark hair. She looked angry. And the man, he looked scared before he fell. Did you see anyone else? Carter asked. Anyone watching from a distance? Mia thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, just them. Carter's jaw tightened, and he leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. All right. If you remember anything else, you tell me, okay? Okay, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Carter stood to leave, he placed a business card on the table. This is my number. If you ever feel unsafe or see anything unusual, you call me. Day or night. Understand? Mia nodded, clutching the card tightly as Carter left. She locked the door behind him, her mind swirling with fear and confusion. She felt like she was part of a puzzle she didn't understand, and the pieces were getting darker by the minute. Vanessa waited anxiously in her apartment, the minutes ticking by like hours. She kept glancing at her phone, expecting another message at any moment. When it finally buzzed, she jumped, her breath catching in her throat. There's a storage facility on Pine Street. Unit 47. Be there in an hour. Come alone. Vanessa's hands shook as she read the message. She didn't want to go, but the image of Mia's innocent face haunted her. If she didn't do as she was told, she'd never forgive herself if something happened to the little girl. She grabbed her coat and keys, her heart pounding as she stepped into the cold night air. The city lights blurred around her as she drove to the address, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What would she find when she got there? And who was behind all of this? When she arrived at the storage facility, the place was eerily quiet. The rows of metal doors stretched out like a maze, each one identical to the next. She found Unit 47 and hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch. Her phone buzzed again. Open it. Vanessa's stomach churned as she unlocked the door and slid it open. Inside was a single table with a small black box sitting on top. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes darting around for any sign of movement. The box had a note attached. Play me. Vanessa's hands trembled as she lifted the lid and found a small audio recorder inside. She pressed play, her breath hitching as a distorted voice filled the air. You thought you could cover this up, Vanessa. But the truth always comes out. If you want to protect the little girl, you'll do exactly as I say. This is far from over. Vanessa's grip on the recorder tightened as the message ended. She felt trapped, cornered by an invisible enemy who seemed to know her every move. As she stepped out of the unit, a figure emerged from the shadows. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the woman from the riverfront. You're in over your head, Vanessa, the woman said coldly. And it's only going to get worse. Vanessa stared at the woman, her pulse pounding in her ears. The shadows of the storage facility seemed to deepen around them, closing in like the walls of a trap. She tried to steady her breathing, but the icy gaze of her tormentor made it impossible. What do you want from me? Vanessa demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. The woman stepped closer, her expression unreadable. You don't get to ask questions, she said coldly. You're not in control here. Vanessa's fists clenched at her sides. I've done everything you asked. I came here, I opened the box. Just tell me what you want so I can end this. The woman tilted her head, a faint, cruel smile tugging at her lips. End this. Oh, Vanessa. We're just getting started. Vanessa's stomach churned as the woman stepped into the light, revealing her face more clearly. She was younger than Vanessa had realized, maybe mid-20s, but her eyes carried a hardened, calculating intensity. Who are you? Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You'll find out soon enough, the woman replied. But first, we need to make sure you understand something. You don't make the rules here. I do. And if you want that little girl to stay safe, you'll follow my instructions to the letter. Vanessa swallowed hard, her hands trembling. What do you want me to do? The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to Vanessa. Your next assignment. Vanessa hesitated, her fingers brushing against the paper as though it might burn her. Slowly, she unfolded it and read the single line written there. Meet Detective Carter. Confess everything. Her breath hitched, and she looked up at the woman in disbelief. Confess? Are you insane? If I go to the police, I'll go to jail. The woman's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. That's the idea. Unless, of course, you want Mia to pay the price for your silence. Vanessa's mind reeled. You're bluffing. You wouldn't hurt her. The woman's expression darkened. Do you really want to take that chance? Vanessa stared at her, torn between fury and despair. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but the memory of the photo of Mia kept her rooted in place. She couldn't risk it. When? Vanessa croaked. Tomorrow, the woman said. Noon. Go to the precinct and ask for Carter. Tell him everything and make it convincing. If you don't, I'll make sure that little girl's life is ruined. Do we understand each other? Vanessa nodded weakly, her hands shaking as she crumpled the paper in her fist. Good, the woman said, turning to leave. And Vanessa, don't even think about trying to run. We're always watching. Detective Carter sat in his office, going over the latest updates on Daniel Grant's case. The witness sketches and phone records were starting to form a clearer picture, but there were still too many gaps. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The case was a mess, and every lead seemed to raise more questions than answers. His phone buzzed, and he picked it up, frowning at the unknown number. Carter. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a hesitant voice. Detective Carter? It's Mia. Carter straightened in his chair, his instincts kicking in. Mia, is everything okay? I think someone's watching me, she said, her voice trembling. There was a car outside my house, and it followed me when I walked home today. Carter's grip on the phone tightened. Did you see who was inside? No, the windows were dark. But it felt wrong. All right, listen to me, Carter said firmly. You did the right thing by calling me. I'm going to send a patrol car to keep an eye on your neighborhood, and I'll come by to talk to you and your mom. You're not alone in this, Mia. We'll keep you safe. Okay, Mia whispered. Thank you. As Carter hung up, his gut told him there was more to this than just a random car. The timing was too suspicious. Someone knew Mia was a witness, and they were trying to intimidate her, or worse. Vanessa barely slept that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. The woman's ultimatum played over and over in her mind. Confess everything. Go to the police. Ruin her own life to save Mia's. Part of her wanted to believe it was a bluff, that the woman wouldn't actually hurt the little girl. But after everything Vanessa had seen and endured, she couldn't be sure. This wasn't a game. Whoever was behind this was ruthless, and they were determined to see her destroyed. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, Vanessa made up her mind. She couldn't go to the police, not yet. If she confessed, she'd be giving up any chance of figuring out who was behind this and stopping them. She needed more time. She needed a plan. But first, she needed to make sure Mia was safe. Mia sat in her room, clutching the business card Detective Carter had given her. She felt a little better knowing the police were watching her neighborhood, but the fear hadn't entirely gone away. The car, the sketches, the bridge, it was all too much for her young mind to process. She heard a noise outside and froze. It was faint, like footsteps on gravel. Slowly, she crept to the window and peered out. Her blood ran cold. A figure was standing across the street, partially obscured by the shadows. It was too dark to see their face, but Mia could tell they were looking directly at her house. Her hand trembled as she picked up the phone and dialed Carter's number. When he answered, she whispered, "They're here." Mia's whisper crackled through Detective Carter's phone, sending a chill down his spine. "Stay where you are, Mia," he said, his voice steady despite the urgency building inside him. "Lock all the doors and windows. Don't move until I get there." "I'm scared," Mia said, her voice trembling. "I know," Carter replied, already grabbing his coat and keys. "But I'm on my way. You're going to be okay. Just stay hidden." As the call ended, Carter barked orders to his team, dispatching a patrol car to Mia's street while he sped toward her house. His gut told him this was no coincidence. Whoever was targeting Mia was escalating, and fast. Vanessa stood at the window of her apartment, staring out at the city as it stirred awake. She hadn't been able to shake the image of Mia from her mind, the little girl's innocence, her vulnerability. Vanessa didn't understand how the pieces fit together, but she knew one thing for sure. Whoever was pulling the strings was using Mia as leverage. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She hesitated before picking it up, dreading what she might find. The message was short but packed with menace. Tick-tock. Vanessa. Time's running out. Vanessa's jaw clenched as she fought the wave of fear threatening to consume her. She had no idea what this person's endgame was, but she was running out of options. If she didn't find a way to stop them, both she and Mia would pay the price. Mia crouched in her closet, clutching a flashlight and her phone as her heart pounded in her chest. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made her flinch. She kept picturing the figure across the street, their shadowy form standing motionless in the darkness. A knock at the door made her jump. "Mia, it's Detective Carter." Relief flooded through her, and she scrambled out of the closet. She peeked through the front window to confirm it was him before unlocking the door and throwing it open. Carter knelt down to her level, his face calm but serious. "Are you okay?" Mia nodded, her eyes wide. There was someone outside. They were watching the house. "Did you see where they went?" Carter asked. "No," Mia said, shaking her head. "They were just standing there, and then they disappeared." Carter placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing calling me. We'll find out who it was. For now, I'm going to stay here and make sure you're safe." Mia nodded, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. Carter stood and called one of the patrol officers outside, giving them instructions to canvass the area. As he turned back to Mia, his mind raced with questions. Who was targeting her? And how far were they willing to go? Across town, Vanessa made her way to a small cafe, her nerves frayed. She had spent the morning replaying every interaction she'd had with the mysterious woman, trying to piece together her motivations. But no matter how hard she tried, the puzzle refused to come together. As she sat at a corner table, stirring her coffee absently, she noticed a man sitting across the room. He was reading a newspaper, his face partially obscured, but something about him felt off. His posture was too rigid, his gaze darting toward her every few moments. Vanessa's stomach tightened. Was he watching her? Or was she just being paranoid? She decided to test her theory. Standing abruptly, she grabbed her coat and walked out of the cafe, heading down the street at a brisk pace. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed her fears. The man had followed her out and was now trailing her at a distance. Vanessa's heart pounded as she quickened her pace, weaving through the crowd in an attempt to lose him. She ducked into an alley, pressing herself against the wall as she tried to catch her breath. When she peeked around the corner, the man was gone. But relief was short-lived. A hand clamped down on her shoulder, and she spun around, coming face to face with him. "Vanessa Lorne," he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Who are you?" Vanessa demanded, taking a step back. "I need you to come with me," he said, ignoring her question. "It's about Daniel Grant." Vanessa's blood ran cold. "I don't know anything about Daniel," she said quickly, but her voice betrayed her fear. The man pulled out a badge. "I'm Agent Michaels, FBI. We've been monitoring this case for weeks, and your name keeps coming up. We need to talk." Back at Mia's house, Carter sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee while Mia colored in a notebook. The patrol officers hadn't found anything unusual in the area, but Carter wasn't ready to let his guard down. Whoever was targeting Mia wasn't going to give up that easily. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from one of his team members. "We've got a lead on the woman from the sketches. Her name is Vanessa Lorne." Carter's eyes narrowed as he read the message. Vanessa. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. He quickly typed a response. "Send me everything we've got on her." As he waited for the reply, Carter's mind churned. If Vanessa was connected to Daniel's disappearance, and possibly Elliot's, then she was the key to unraveling this entire case. But how did Mia fit into it? Why would someone target an innocent child to get to Vanessa? Vanessa sat across from Agent Michaels in a sterile interrogation room, her nerves on edge. She'd been brought to the local FBI field office under the guise of a voluntary interview, but it felt anything but voluntary. "We've been investigating Daniel Grant's disappearance," Michaels began, his tone measured. "And we know you were one of the last people to see him alive." Vanessa forced herself to meet his gaze. "I told the police everything. Daniel and I talked, but that's it. I don't know what happened to him after that." Michaels leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "That's not what our other sources are saying." Vanessa's chest tightened. "What other sources?" Michaels didn't answer. Instead, he slid a photo across the table. It was a surveillance image of Vanessa on the bridge the night Daniel disappeared. "Care to explain this?" Michaels asked. Vanessa's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The walls felt like they were closing in, and for the first time, she realized she might not be able to escape the truth. Vanessa sat frozen in the interrogation room, staring at the surveillance photo on the table. Her mind raced with excuses, explanations, anything that could buy her time, but the walls felt like they were closing in. She was out of options, and Agent Michael's piercing gaze only heightened her desperation. I don't know what you want me to say," Vanessa stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Start with the truth," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "You were on the bridge the night Daniel Grant disappeared. We have the evidence. Now it's your chance to tell us what really happened." Vanessa's chest tightened. The truth. The truth would destroy her. But the weight of the secrets she'd been carrying, the lies, the fear, had become unbearable. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "It was an accident," she said, her voice trembling. "We argued. I pushed him, but I didn't mean for him to fall." Michaels didn't react, his expression unreadable. "And what about Elliot?" Vanessa's stomach churned. That wasn't my fault. He came after me, trying to record me. We struggled, and he fell." "Two accidents," Michael said, his tone skeptical. "You're either the unluckiest person alive, or there's more to this story." Before Vanessa could respond, the door to the interrogation room opened, and another agent stepped in, whispering something in Michael's ear. His expression darkened. "What is it?" Vanessa asked, panic rising in her chest. Michael stood abruptly, gathering the photo and files from the table. "Wait here," he said curtly before leaving the room. Vanessa was left alone, her mind spiraling. She couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. At Mia's house, Detective Carter was piecing together the latest updates on Vanessa. The evidence was damning: her connection to Daniel, her presence on the bridge, and her name linked to Elliot's disappearance. But there was one piece that didn't fit: the mysterious threats involving Mia. His phone buzzed with a message from the patrol officer stationed outside Mia's house. All clear so far, but she's still nervous. Carter glanced at Mia, who was sitting on the couch, clutching a stuffed animal. "You're safe," he said gently. "We won't let anything happen to you." Mia nodded, but her wide eyes told a different story. "Do you think the bad lady is still out there?" she asked softly. Carter hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We're going to find her. And when we do, she won't be able to hurt anyone else." Vanessa's interrogation took a sharp turn when Michaels returned, his expression grim. He dropped a new photo on the table, this one more chilling than the last. It was a blurry shot of Mia, sitting at her kitchen table, unaware of the camera aimed at her. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" she whispered. "It was sent to us anonymously," Michaels said. "Whoever's been watching her is escalating." Vanessa's heart raced. She thought of the mysterious woman who had been pulling the strings, the threats, the cryptic messages. "It's not me," she said quickly. "I didn't send that." "Then who did?" Michaels asked, his voice sharp. "Because someone out there knows about Mia, and they're using her to manipulate you." Vanessa hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of the woman at the riverfront, her cold smile, her calculated threats. "She's working with someone," Vanessa said. "Someone who knows everything. They're the ones targeting Mia." Michaels leaned forward. "Give me a name." "I don't know her name," Vanessa admitted. "But she's dangerous. And she won't stop." Michaels studied her, weighing her words. "If you're telling the truth, then you need to help us stop her. Otherwise, you'll be the one taking the fall for all of this." Mia's quiet night took a terrifying turn when the lights in her house flickered and went out. She froze, clutching her stuffed animal as fear gripped her. Outside, the sound of footsteps on gravel sent her heart racing. "Detective Carter," she called out, her voice trembling. No response. Mia ran to the front door and peeked through the curtain. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the porch light, their face hidden. The figure took a step forward, and Mia stumbled back, her breathing quick and shallow. A knock at the door shattered the silence. "Mia, it's me, Detective Carter." The voice was firm, but it carried a note of urgency. Mia hesitated, peeking through the curtain again. Relief washed over her when she saw Carter standing there, his badge in hand. She unlocked the door and threw it open. "There was someone outside," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "I saw them." Carter's eyes scanned the darkness, his hand instinctively resting on his holstered weapon. "Stay here," he said, stepping outside to investigate. Moments later, a loud crash echoed from the side of the house. Carter drew his gun, motioning for Mia to stay back. He moved cautiously toward the sound, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. In the shadows, a figure lunged at him. Carter reacted instantly, dodging the attack and pinning the assailant to the ground. The light revealed a young man, his face pale and panicked. "Who are you?" Carter demanded. The man struggled, his voice frantic. "She made me do it. She said she'd kill me if I didn't." "Who?" Carter barked. "The woman. The one pulling the strings," the man gasped. "She's everywhere. You can't stop her." At the precinct, Vanessa was escorted to a holding cell. She sat on the cold bench, her thoughts a chaotic mess. She didn't know who to trust, who was really behind all of this. But one thing was clear, she was running out of time to fix the mess she'd created. As she sat there, the door to the holding area creaked open. Michaels entered, his expression unreadable. "We caught someone outside Mia's house," he said. "He claims there's a woman orchestrating all of this." Vanessa's breath hitched. "The woman from the riverfront?" Michaels nodded. "We're closing in on her. If you have anything else to tell us, now's the time." Vanessa hesitated, then made her decision. "I want to help," she said. "But I need to know Mia is safe." "She is," Michaels said firmly. "Now help us end this." The operation to capture the mysterious woman was swift and precise. Acting on Vanessa's information and the captured man's confession, the FBI tracked her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Carter and his team stormed the location, catching her by surprise. The woman was arrested without incident, her cold demeanor never wavering as she was led away in handcuffs. Vanessa watched the news coverage from her cell, a mix of relief and guilt washing over her. It was over. But at what cost? Weeks later, Vanessa stood in court, facing the consequences of her actions. She had confessed everything, and while her cooperation with the investigation earned her some leniency, she still faced prison time. Mia, now safe and protected, attended the trial with Carter by her side. As Vanessa was led away, their eyes met briefly. There was no forgiveness in Mia's gaze, but there was understanding. Both of them had been pawns in a dangerous game, and both would carry the scars forever. The bridge where it all began stood silent and empty, the river below flowing on, indifferent to the lives it had touched. The secrets it had witnessed were now exposed, but the damage they had caused would linger long after the headlines faded. For Vanessa, for Mia, and for everyone caught in the web of lies, life would never be the same.